Hello everyone, welcome back to another Unity tutorial. We got a lot to cover today, except this time it's going to be in 2D instead of 3D, as per the syllabus. So, to get started here, we're going to go to New Project, and instead of clicking on 3D, you're going to click on 2D, and really that's the only difference. I already have a little project created here with some files. You can go ahead and create some things similar in Paint.net or Paint or Krita or whatever you use to make 2D assets. I'll just pull them up here. So I made a little tile set. It's just some dirt, and all this was done in seconds. So you could probably make something a lot better. I made a little cherry, and then I made our player character with some animations. I thought that was pretty cool. Okay. Now, what are we going to do? So first, we're going to manipulate some of these assets. So we need to go ahead and change some of these settings here. So I'm going to click Shift and click all of these so as to edit all of them at once. Okay, and then what do we need to change? We're already on Sprite. Sprite mode needs to be set to multiple pixels per unit. We'll make that 16, not 16,000. Basically, it already says what this is, but it's Unity doesn't know, like for example, with each of these squares, we want to know how many pixels fits inside one of these squares. Well, for me, I designed the dirt tiles so that way it's 16 pixels per square, and that makes sense. Okay, and what else? Instead of bilinear, we don't want a filter at all because we're just dealing with pixel art, and that should be good. If I hit apply, except cherry, this is not a multiple sprite. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, now we need to actually edit the sprite, and we need to, since these are basically the different frames of the animation, we need to slice this up into its individual parts. If I click on the slice button here, I think automatic should do just fine. Yes, that should be fine. I want to drag this all the way up to the top, just so that way we stay consistent. Okay, that should be good there. Ask us to save. Along with the dirt tiles, we need to cut these up as well. I'll just go automatic, but if you have some convoluted shapes, you can do grid by cell size. Automatic works with squares though, obviously. Okay, I'll apply. And now we need to actually go about placing these objects on the scene. Okay, so in my hierarchy, I'm going to right click, create a 2D object, sprites, and square. Oh, sorry, wrong object first. 2D object, tile map, rectangular. We will get to adding squares, but not yet. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just label this terrain, because this is the tile map where our terrain will be. And I haven't explained it yet, but a tile map is basically a place for all your terrain tiles to be, or, well, in our case it will be terrain, but you can also have foreground and background objects as well. In our case, like I said, this will be the terrain tile map. Okay, and we're gonna go ahead and add in like a palette for us to be able to paint with these tools as well. Okay, now let's go ahead and go up to Window, 2D, Tile Palette, and you can keep this as sort of a floating window, or I'll put it like right around here. Okay, now what we're gonna do, we're gonna create a new palette, and I'll also call this terrain. It doesn't have to match the name, but this makes sense. Okay, and now we need to choose a file for this to go under. Assets is probably fine. Okay, and now I'm going to drag and drop in my dirt tiles. And this time I will create a new folder for this one in case I wanted a different tile set besides dirt. Okay, and now we get this little palette here that I can paint with, and you can see this is sort of like the view of the camera, the camera by default, and it sort of cuts my objects up into little squares, and these are too big. Did I click the wrong thing? I think I did. Oh, I think it should be 32 actually. I might have put the wrong, there it is. Okay, 32. These are how big is Amogus? I'll also make him 32. Okay. As with the cherry. my bad. Got the wrong number. Okay. Back to tile palette. Now, if I go ahead and fill up the scene view here, I can start painting in our little scene, and you can see there are a bunch of other tools too, but the paint tool works pretty good for basic shapes. I'll do this for now. We need some of these. One of these here. I'm trying to do this quickly so as to not waste time. You get the idea though. Okay, and of course you can get as detailed as you want with all these tiles. For me, this will probably do just fine. Okay. I'm just now realizing one thing I forgot to do is have a dirt block with grass on the bottom side if I wanted to do floating islands, but we won't worry about that for now. Okay. Now if I hit play, you can see these are all within the view of the scene. I won't worry about background for now. We'll get into a bunch of details probably in the next video. Okay, but that looks pretty good. Now let's actually add a character and get them moving around. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to the inspector, right click, add a 2D object sprite square, like I accidentally did a moment ago. I'll reset the transform, just like 3D. I'll call it player. And where it has sprite right here, I'm going to actually click here and drag in our first sprite. You can see there's a bunch of these running animations, but I'm going to just have the first one for now. Okay, click, drag, and now our character is born. Isn't that great? Okay. And now I'm going to actually click on the move tool, click control, and put them over here. And it actually is pretty small, isn't it? Let's change the pixel size back to 16. I liked it better. It was twice the size. Okay, that's better. Let's move them right there. All right. Now we need a few familiar components, like, well, let's hit play, see what happens. Nothing should happen because we didn't tell it to move. If we add component, we can go to rigid body 2D. You want to make sure you're adding the 2D versions of all these familiar components. Everything looks good here. Do we fall? We should fall. Yeah. There we go. And just to be clear, once we add our components, I'm going to just drag this guy up so he can fall a little bit. Okay. And now, let's give him a box collider 2D. Now this is already pretty good, but let's go ahead and edit the collider. And just so the mechanics feel a little bit better and more forgiving, I'm going to actually decrease the size of the box collider a bit, probably right about there. Just so it's, you know, if you get hit by a missile or something, you feel a bit better about dodging something. Anyways, it also makes movement on terrain feel a little bit better. And so now we're going to do similar things with the terrain. Over on terrain, we have the renderer, which, as you can imagine, if you disable, it does not render the terrain, or that tile map. And now for add component, instead of box collider, if I just type in collider, you can see all the different options we have. We're going to go to Tilemap Collider 2D. You'll see it adds our familiar green squares to every single tile. But this can be, and actually this already works, you know, it's perfectly fine, but it's not very performant because we have every single, like these squares in the middle, we don't ever need to check those for collisions. And also it can cause bugs a little bit with like overlapping colliders. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another collider called a Composite Collider 2D. And we need to, before we forget, Tilemap, we need to click on Used by Composite. Okay, and you see it sort of makes this one big, it sort of finds all the adjacent tiles and meshes them all together into one collider. And we get the same effect, well, when you add Composite Collider, by default it adds a rigid body, and so therefore our tiles, our terrain is also being affected by gravity and falling. So what we want to do is change our dynamic body type to static, which, as we know from our lessons in 3D, it can still affect other objects with physics, collisions and whatnot, but it won't be affected by gravity itself. And so, let's give it a test again. There we go. Alright, so that's pretty good. Now let's actually get our player moving around. We won't worry about animations for this video, let's just get him jumping and moving around, and then we'll worry about that next video, polishing. Okay, I'm going to lower these for now. And on our player, I'm going to add component, and I'm going to add a new script. I'll call it SCR player movement. The first script is almost always player movement. Okay, I'll double click to open it up into Visual Studio. And now, what do we want to write? Well, we want to get the when we detect a button press, we want to get the component rigid body and then add a velocity. So let's do that in our update. I'll say if, okay, Visual Studio is not responding to keywords from Unity. So familiar bug, all we do is go into Edit, Preferences, External Tools, Open by File Extension, change that external script editor to Visual Studio, regenerate. I might have to exit this and open it again. And that should be all that we needed to fix. Let's try it again. Input, there we go. Let's call it get key down, because we'll add the jump first. How about that? I'll say key code dot space would, yeah, let's do space. Sure. We do A or W all the time. Okay, let's open these up. Now, what do we want to do? We want to. This script is on the player, remember, which has the component rigid body 2D. So we're going to get that to reference. Rigid body 2D. Close the function. We want to adjust the velocity. Remember, since this is a 2D game, our X is in this direction, our Y is in this direction, left is negative, right is positive, up is positive, down is negative. Okay. And with that in mind, we're going to actually not change that. We're going to, oh yes, dot, we need to get the velocity component, or attribute, equals new vector 3. We're going to call the vector 3, but we're going to pass in 0 for the z, since we don't want any, I mean, even if we wanted to change something on the z-axis, see it's not actually moving because it's coming either close or far away from the camera. And then we're just going to pass in something like 0, 0, 0. Okay, now this wouldn't actually move, obviously, so let's go ahead and create some variables. I'll just call them public, jump, speed, and, oops, that's obviously not correct. Int, jump speed, and then public, int, move speed. Okay, call this jump speed. Let's go ahead and give this a test once we describe what jump height is, or jump speed. Let's try 7. Okay, now let's see what happens. Okay, when I press space, we go up. Now I can just do infinite double jumps, triple jumps, because we don't have any sort of conditional statement to detect when we're on the ground. We could do that, but we won't. We'll worry about that next video, or the video after that. Okay, works perfect. Let's go ahead and do the same thing, but for moving left and right. Okay, and now I'm going to change this to A. I'm going to make this the D, and I'll even add in some comments, because why not? Player move, player jump. Player move left. Player move right. Okay, we want to get instead of jump height, we want to move 0 on the y-axis, and we want to move on the x-axis, but when we move left, we want that to be negative. Okay, and I think that should be good. Let's go ahead and run this again. What do we want our move speed to be? I'm not sure. Let's try 4. Okay, let's just try. Okay, I can jump still, that's good. A, D, O, we're falling over. And that's because we still have rigid body, which means we still have physics, and rotation is part of physics, if you didn't know. So, what are we going to do? Rigid body constraints, we are going to freeze the rotation along the z-axis. So, you might be wondering, like, what the heck? We don't deal with the z-axis in 2D. Well, actually, if you think about it, the z-axis itself is the axis that runs along the z dimension, which is into and out of the camera. So when our character flops over like this, it's actually rotating along the z-axis. So now that I've frozen that rotation, if I move left and right, you can see we are good to go. Now, my player, as soon as I let go of A and D, he is sliding a bit, and we don't like that. So we could add some physics materials to the ground. One thing I'm going to fix first, actually, is that unlike jump, where if I hold down space, I only want to jump once, right? But if I hold down A and D, I want to keep moving in that direction. So, as you probably already guessed, instead of get key down, we just want to do get key for our move controls, because those return true every frame the user holds down the key, okay, which make them inherently different from get key down. Now let's try that again. Okay, and now good to know, our collisions are still working with the side of the walls, but yeah, as you can see, it was working. Holding down the keys, yeah, good to go. Interesting, now I can actually move around. So over the next few tutorials, we'll work on actually getting together a working platformer game. These are just the basic steps. We didn't even get the cool animations yet, but we will. So that'll be enough for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Reach out to me if you have any questions.